Speech by William Gladstone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blashford. Speech given to the House of Commons on the 27th of June 1888 by William Gladstone. The appeal which has been made to me by the Right Honourable Gentleman the President of the Local Government Board is a very fair appeal. He has a right to know, and I will endeavour to explain to him why, having been at the head of the government in 1884, and having voted against proceeding with the Channel Tunnel Bill, I do not take the same course on the present occasion. The Right Honourable Gentleman has spoken for the government to which he belongs, and so far he is in the same position as was my Right Honourable friend, the member for West Birmingham, when, in 1885, he asked the House to put a negative upon the bill. But the Right Honourable Gentleman will at once perceive the broad and vital difference between the speech which he has now made in stating the grounds for his proceeding, and the speech which was then made by my Right Honourable friend. The Right Honourable Gentleman has opposed the Channel Tunnel Bill, I am sorry to say, upon its merits, upon grounds which will be as good in any future year as they are at the present moment. My Right Honourable friend, the member for West Birmingham, is not in the House, but I have had within the last week or 10 days an opportunity, through his kindness, of going over the whole ground and testing our several recollections, and I believe I am correct in saying that in the speech of my Right Honourable friend there was not one word condemnatory of the Channel Tunnel upon its merits, and that his opposition was an opposition of time, and of time only. For my part, I could not have taken then any other position, and I will presently state why it was that I was a party to opposition on that ground. It is a matter of justice to the honourable member for Hythe and to the promoters of the Channel Tunnel, after what happened in 1884 and 1885, I believe these were the years, though I am not certain that I am absolutely correct, that I should explain the view which I took of their case, and the reasons which induced me at that period, without any doubt or hesitation, to join in the opposition to the progress of the bill. I am very glad to think, after the debate of last night, that we are now engaged in a discussion of a very different kind. I do not think that any person who agrees with me will be induced to vote against the government from any desire to displace it, or that any gentleman who will vote with the government will do so upon the ground that this is one of the sacrifices required from them to protect the country against the danger of a liberal invasion of the benches opposite. On the other hand, I am afraid that our arguments in this matter are looked upon as singularly unsatisfactory by our opponents. On political questions we often feel that, at any rate, there is something in what the other man says, but on this occasion we seem to get at the ultimate principles and modes of thinking which are fixed on one side and fixed on the other, and which would lead us to describe the opposite arguments in very disrespectful terms. The Right Honourable Gentleman has stated his case with force, clearness, and ability, and yet I frankly own, and frankness is after all a great virtue, the whole of the considerations he has advanced, and his arguments against this tunnel are neither better nor worse than mere and sheer bugbears. Having gone thus far in the exercise of frankness, I will for the rest of my speech endeavour to fall back on the virtue of courtesy, and I will not recur to the use of any language of that character, by which I only meant to illustrate the position in which we stand to one another, and which we unhappily aggravated in 1884. Now, sir, this subject was first introduced to me by a Tory Chancellor of the Exchequer. It was first introduced to me in the year 1865 by a gentleman whose name will always be mentioned with respect in this House, I mean Mr. Ward Hunt. He was not Chancellor of the Exchequer at that exact time, for I was. He came to me as the leader of a deputation, and endeavoured to induce, or perhaps I should say to seduce me, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, to Lord Palmerston, into giving my support to the promotion of this dangerous project. Mr. Ward Hunt was totally insensible of the dreadful nature of the petition he was making. Notwithstanding his position in the Conservative party, he was totally unaware of all the dangers that have been pointed out by the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite. And here, sir, I am obliged to correct a statement of my honourable friend the member for Hythe, who, on the authority of someone or other, alleged that I alone among the ministers of that day was disposed to give a guarantee in some shape or other to the promoters of the project. I was never disposed to give a guarantee to the extent of one single farthing to the promoters of this scheme or any other scheme of a similar kind. I find it necessary, for my own credit, perhaps, at any rate for the truth of history, to disclaim it. Sir, I was instructed on behalf of the government, and with my own full concurrence, to refuse a guarantee, but we did so without giving the slightest opposition to the tunnel scheme. A series of other governments followed, and every one of those governments officially committed itself on the merits of the tunnel. Lord Granville on the part of the government of 1868, Lord Derby on the part of the government of 1874, and I think the senior Lord Derby, the distinguished Prime Minister of a former period, expressed precisely similar sentiments. and every one of these governments, acting unanimously, was engaged so far in the promotion of this project that they gave it their unequivocal sanction. Nor did they stop there, but they entered upon international proceedings. Communications were established with France. A commission was appointed on the part of the two countries, and I do not wish to bring home to the minds of honourable and right honourable gentlemen the degree to which our honour and our dignity in an international aspect are involved in the question before the House. I must say that that is one of the most serious considerations that operate on my mind with regard to the promotion of this bill. The two governments jointly constituted a commission to consider the details, the important and difficult details of the schemes by means of which this great project could be best advanced. The principle of the project was taken for granted, on the one side and on the other, when we entered into these general proceedings with the French government. The Commission laid down conditions which were to be the basis of a treaty between the two countries, and the actual signature of the treaty was suspended, not upon the ground of any political apprehension whatever, but simply, I believe, upon the ground that financial considerations did not at that moment favour the progress of this scheme. What dwells upon my mind is this, that there was very much of the character of an engagement of honour in the proceedings between England and France, and that is a matter of some difficulty to justify the recession of a kingdom like this from a position of that kind, after you have voluntarily and deliberately, and after long thought and reflection, made it the subject of such international proceedings. The right honourable gentleman says, and I have no doubt very truly, that there are serious objections raised by the military authorities against the scheme. Well, sir, at the time I am speaking of, the opinion of the military authorities was in favour of the tunnel. The two governments did not act in respect of the tunnel without consulting the military authorities, and those military authorities whom the government had to consult were distinctly favourable to the tunnel. But I think I may go a little further than that, and may venture to read, at least for the purpose of challenging contradiction if it can be challenged, a short extract from a very well-informed memorandum with which I have been supplied on the part of the promoters, and which is one which can easily be brought to issue. The extract to which I refer says, "It was not until the autumn of 1881 that any military opinion adverse to the tunnel was expressed." Now, sir, that is a remarkable fact. The tunnel was then a scheme 20 years old. It had been discussed in every possible form. It had been the subject of much official correspondence, and it had received the assent of a number of governments. Those governments would not have assented and did not assent without the authority of the military department and the advice of their military advisers, and until the year 1881 these portentous discoveries, which have taken possession of the mind and imagination of the right honourable gentleman, and I suppose of those who sit near him, were never heard of. Surely that is rather a staggering circumstance. And now I will relate the facts upon which the government of 1881 and the following years had to base itself in dealing with this subject. At that time we find that the military authorities had commenced their opposition, and a great ferment began to prevail. A combination of powers was brought into operation. The literary authorities were brought to back up the military authorities. Great poets invoked the muses and strove, not as great poets in other times used to do, to embolden their countrymen by conjuring up phantoms of danger that were not fit to be presented to anybody except to that valuable class of the community that the right honourable gentleman has described in his speech as suffering occasionally the pains of seasickness. Then, sir, the army, the military host and the literary host were backed by the opinion of what is called society, and society is always ready for the enjoyment of the luxury of a good panic. There is nothing more enjoyable than a good panic, when that panic is based on a latent conviction that the thing which it contemplates is not in the least degree likely to happen. These speculative panics, these panics in the air, have an attraction for certain classes of minds that is indescribable, and these classes of minds, I am bound to say, are very largely to be found among the educated portion of society. The subject of this panic never touched the mind of the nation. These things are not accessible to the mind of the nation. They are accessible to what is called the public opinion of the day, that is to say, public opinion manufactured in London by great editors and clubs who are at all times formidable, and a great power for the purposes of the moment, but who are a greater power and become an overwhelming power when they are backed by the threefold forces of the military and literary authorities and the social circles of London. Well, sir, these powers among them created at that period such panic that even those who were most favourable to the tunnel, of whom I was one, thought it quite vain to offer a direct opposition. We therefore propose the appointment of a joint committee, and the issue of that joint committee has been very fairly stated by the right honourable gentleman. I am bound to make a fair admission, and I do it in the presence of my noble friend the member for the Rossendale division of Lancashire, whose opinion at the time I do not now remember, that although in the government of 1868, to which he and I belonged, there never was a question as to the propriety of the tunnel, and Lord Granville wrote in that sense, and even instituted communications with France,